We will now begin with the first of two fireside chats. It is with distinct privilege that we host Mr. Walter Isaacson to be the moderator. Mr. Isaacson embodies a life that defines the nature of innovation. His high-profile executive leadership positions include President of the Aspen Institute, Chairman and CEO of Cable News Network, Managing Editor of Time, and prolific authorships, including, among others, The Wise Men, biographies of Henry Kissinger, Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, and Steve Jobs. And his most recent book encapsulates what we look to accomplish today, The Innovators. Mr. Isaacson's perspectives are uniquely positioned to help us approach the technology revolutions, rapidly ushering in new challenges and opportunities globally. Please also join me in a warm welcome for our first guest of honor, Mr. Alan Blue, co-founder of LinkedIn.
Yay.
Mr. Blue currently focuses on strategy and future-facing product development. He was also part of the founding team of SocialNet in the late 1990s and has worked as a product manager and designer at PayPal and elsewhere. Mr. Blue sits on the board of the Hope Street Group, a nonprofit group that convenes government, philanthropy, industry, and entrepreneurship to provide economic opportunity for all Americans and brings a Silicon Valley-style innovation to its jobs and workforce initiative. We look forward to the chat.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me back here again. And I'll give a shout out to my successor as editor of Time Magazine, Undersecretary Richard Stengel, who is doing a lot of innovation in public diplomacy. Thanks for being here. I'm sort of a biographer, so I'm going to start with a biographer's question. Right. Which is, everybody talks about engineering and science and math. Mm-hmm. You're a theater designer, yep. And you start a tech company. Yep. How did that happen?
So for the first 7 years of my career, that's what I did. I was in the professional theater. So I was primarily a designer, lighting and scenery. And one day I met a guy. I was actually working in the Bay Area. Had a friend who introduced me to Reid Hoffman, who became my co-founder at SocialNet, and then I went with him to PayPal, and then on to LinkedIn. So it was, in fact, a professional network story.
What was the mission? What was the social mission?
So, first and foremost, LinkedIn is a business, but we know that the business we're in is about creating economic opportunity. In the end, the world that we see is one where essentially everybody in the world has access to the resources they need to live the kind of life and have the kind of career they actually want to have. And for us, that is a personal mission. It's to drive meaning and value as well as economic wherewithal in the hands of individuals. But it's also a social mission for the world, because so much of what makes the world into a peaceful and prosperous place comes from a world which is full of people who have opportunity and full of people who have meaning and hope for their own lives.
So how can it be a tool for both diplomacy and development?
So I think the most important thing, at least the way we see it, is, I guess there are two main areas. So the first one are direct things, which are how could LinkedIn become a mechanism by which we can actually connect people together to do more work, to create more companies, to drive more training, to create more jobs. All of those things are very real possibilities. It's actually what LinkedIn does on a daily basis right now. The second one is, can we, by increasing economic prosperity around the world, make the world into a more stable and predictable and sort of future-facing place?
How does the economic graph you're doing fit into that?
Yeah, so we have this term we call the economic graph. So back in the early days when we started, this was 2003, we originally had a graph, and this is using the mathematical term for a network, a graph which represented only people. So it was basically professionals who had connected to each other. But it turns out there was some other stuff in that graph which came along kind of for free. So when a professional joins LinkedIn, they say where they work, which means that companies were part of that graph as well. And they say where they went to school, so their schools are part of the graph. And it turns out the jobs they're actually pursuing became part of the graph, and the skills they have became part of the graph. And after a while, we realized that the words people graph or professional graph wasn't enough to actually describe what we had. We, in fact, had a picture of the entire world economy, especially in the way that talent moves from company to company and place to place. Because the economic graph is something which most professionals use on a daily basis. You basically use it to go through. Every time you search on LinkedIn, you're using the economic graph. But when you step back from it, you get a different picture because you can sort of see it all at once. So you can begin to track the way talent moves from company to company. You can begin to see which types of education are the most powerful for driving good career outcomes. You can begin to see which kind of programs are the most successful for creating opportunity for people later in their lives. So the economic graph for us has become a tool that not only we look at ourselves, but we share with partners in government. So an example would be last year, Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, sat down with us, and we have provided for them an in-depth sort of view of what the economic graph in New York City actually looks like. And from that, they are able to tell how the talent stays in New York. Specifically, they were looking at tech talent. They're focused on technology. But how the talent stays in New York, how it's generated in New York, where people go when they leave New York. All of that information is very valuable for them when they're talking about what curricula they should pursue in the public schools, what curricula they should pursue with City University, what kind of companies they need to be attracting to the city in order to be able to keep that tech talent in the city itself.
You know, we're supposed to be talking about innovation, and even though I've written a book with that in the title,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what the word means. Give me a few examples of where you had to innovate and what was the pushback.
So I think probably, so let me give you a couple of examples. So the first one is the graph itself. We were one of the very first companies that had actually a social graph, sort of 6-degree style graph of human beings. Not the very first, there were a couple others which were sort of out there, but we were one of the very first that actually did it. And that, as it turns out, required very little pushback. I had very little pushback against it because it was already representing something which existed in the world. It was a set of relationships between people. So it's actually pretty easy to get that to function. But an area that we're working on right now is about how could you actually take that graph, this thing we've built up with all the companies and all the individuals and all the educators together in one place. And could you in fact encourage educators and employers to work together to be able to build the right training for education in the U.S.? And that's a brand new idea. That's a brand new thing. You see it in pockets, especially for nurses and for healthcare. This is actually a very common story. So what you'll see is a hospital go out to the local community colleges and work to develop curricula to bring people in to essentially become, down the line, RNs. But could we actually do that at scale? Could we make it work for any industry? Could we make it work for every company, no matter how big or how small? And that's exactly the work that we're trying to do.
So you
right
call that the LinkedIn Cities Project. Why do you call it that?
That's what we call it internally. It's part of an overall initiative that we're doing with the Markle Foundation, as well as Arizona State University and edX, which is out of MIT, which the overall term for it is Skillful. So Skillful is a project which brings together educators, employers, and individuals together in one place with government and then support organizations, which we call navigators internally, who will actually provide support for the individuals who are making this change. It's about democratizing not just the access to technology, but also the inclusiveness of technology.
You know, 20 years ago, I would have argued, and probably did argue, that technology was going to decrease the economic divide and the divide between people who had great economic opportunities and didn't. And if I could have envisioned why that would happen, I would have envisioned LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And yet it hadn't happened. There's a digital divide, those who are privileged and those who aren't. What are you doing to solve that?
So I think the very first project I would point to is the Skillful project that we're working on right now, because the Skillful project is specifically targeted at people who normally wouldn't think LinkedIn was for them. They think LinkedIn's for professionals, it's for people who are white-collar jobs. Actually, LinkedIn's for everybody, and we want LinkedIn to be the solution for anybody who's thinking about starting out their career, and in the cases where they need it, to get the training necessary to do that. Other places that we're working this summer with the White House to work with small businesses. We have millions of small businesses on LinkedIn to help build summer jobs for kids across the country. And LinkedIn is a great platform for actually doing
You want to
that.
introduce, a couple people here who are working on that. Pablo.
Yeah, so Pablo and Nicole.
Nicole
Chavez.
Pablo
Nicole
Chavez.
Isaac.
Is working with both of my Brother's Keeper group and everything else to do very simple things like every kid deserves a summer job. How do we link them into that?
Yeah.
So you deserve a good shout out for that. Thank
Yep.
y'all. All right, let's get very specific here. We have 3 Ds, and I'll do them in reverse, or not in reverse order, but the reverse order from the way they're traditionally done. Which is, let's start with development.
Development.
How could LinkedIn, if you were in charge of USAID or its technology,
Yeah.
what would you do if you were brainstorming? How can we help development in this world?
So as far as LinkedIn specifically is concerned, so we had a conversation with a group called the American Refugee Committee, which is basically an organization which works primarily in the Congo, but they're particularly interested in developing the very basic, most fundamental components of economies for people basically who are living very much on the margins of society in that country. I think it's a great example to say, if you've got a local economic center, like a city, which basically has already existing economy and existing supply chain and sort of existing economic reality, the question is, could you use the relationships between the set of people in the city and the people who are just outside the city to essentially extend that economic footprint? And you could do that with LinkedIn right now, because you can go and you can talk to people who are in the city, who are already in the program, who are already connected together. And the question is, how can they basically become a market for people on the outside who are trying to sell goods and services, looking for the right connection internally to make something happen? That's the kind of thing that I would think about in terms of development.
What about with Undersecretary Stengel here in public diplomacy and countering violent extremism? What ideas would you throw out there?
So the way we have, and I have too, have thought about this over the years, to us, one of the most tractable components around violence, or so it seems to us, and I wish I could say, I wish I could say I'm an expert in this area, but this is based on observation and what we've actually seen. The question is, what levers do you actually have to pull to make a difference? And for us at LinkedIn, the lever has always been an economic lever, because a group of people who have great prospects for the future, who can send their kids to college, who know that the next generation is going to be better off than the current generation, that's a group of people with a stake in the future. That's a group of people with somebody with something to dream about and a desire for stability. So for us, when we think about technology and what it's capable of doing, we think about the ways in which it can extend economic prosperity through the world, and we believe lead to a place where the conversation is a much more reasonable one, where a lot of the things which are the foundations of extremism, actually, they have less purchase, because there's so much more opportunity for people. We know it's not a full solution. It isn't a full solution, but I think it's a major component of the solution. And that's something that technology is actually remarkably good at doing.
Now, when we get to defense and national security, you've talked about the democratization of technology.
Yeah, I know that's a big topic today.
And and that is a topic. how does that impact national security and defense?
Well, excuse me. So I think as everybody in this room knows, it's kind of a remarkable time. As I say, it's a remarkable time to be alive. And one of the reasons that's the case is that the rate of change, our capacity as human beings in terms of what we can actually get done is growing exponentially right now. That sets up gigantic opportunities for us in the future. When it comes to sort of how can we effectively all live together on the same planet, it was funny we saw that little clip a little earlier about all sharing one planet.
Small planet.
Technology is a force for allowing us to live together here peacefully, but it doesn't happen all at once. Unfortunately, it's going to take us many years to get to the place where we're going to do it. I would say that technology is a necessary component of arriving at that future. From a defense perspective, I think the biggest thing about the democratization, or if you want to call that the sort of general availability of technology, is that as these technologies become more powerful, they also end up in more and more people's hands over time. And while we live in a place where we're scrabbling over resources, or we have pressures from things like climate change, the accessibility of that technology is something which has the potential to be destabilizing. So we have a bunch of challenges that we have to face in the next 15, 20 years as we ride it forward to the place where we can begin to directly address some of those issues, specifically around we have to address the question around how do we make sure that technology doesn't make defense a much harder problem? Mm-hmm. But we also have to address the problem, like how do we make the world into a more abundant and prosperous place?
But does technology help create the rise of non-national, transnational groups? And is it going to break down this 400-year-old order we've had based on nation states?
I think that it is, I couldn't tell you what the impact is, but the ability for human beings to come together in new ways is definitely being enabled by technology.
Mm-hmm. Let me, I don't know if there are any questions out there. I've got a few more, but let me open it up in case people have thoughts or questions. Yeah, right there, sir. Just shout it out. I'll repeat it. Yeah. Technology and privacy. And to what extent, we'll go ahead first.
Well, technology and privacy, we are, and this is something obviously which has been in the news a bunch, and I think it's a great example of the growing need for technology companies, LinkedIn included, but basically anybody who is providing services to individuals to be able to work more effectively with government. I think the possibilities of being able to work together are strong, but we need to approach them extremely proactively and from a legislative perspective. The technology has changed the rules of the game regarding what privacy is and what privacy needs to be. Privacy is an essential...
Give me an example of that.
Well, so privacy is an essential component of making essentially the new world of the way the economy works function. It allows us to transact safely online. It allows us to interact with people safely over great distances. So those are all fundamental ways in which basically didn't exist. Those were all brokered by very specific organizations and so forth in the past. Now those are brokered by individuals interacting with each other.
So how would you work better with government to ensure privacy, but also ensure that what you've created can be a tool for what government can do well?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I was lucky enough to have a conversation with Senator Warner about this. He and several other voices in Congress are very thoughtful about understanding the impact technology actually has, and in looking for ways to have a proactive conversation about what we should actually do. Senator Warner understands, and as we all should, that the speed of technological change is great, so the need to get ahead of it is actually very important, and to do so in a reasoned, thoughtful, and inclusive way. So instead of relying solely on everything that's existed so far and the way we understand the way the economy functions. Let's get together and talk, both public and private sector, about the way what's the changes are actually going to be. Because it is in the interest of both parties to have a great solution to that problem going forward.
Well, let's take a very specific change that Senator Warner is focusing on, which is a change from what I would call the W-2 economy, meaning you go to a job and you get your pensions and your benefits and everything, to a 1099 or gig economy, which is your consultant by day doing gig jobs and your Uber driver, et cetera, by night, and you're piecing together things like that. Our economy is not based on that model. We have an industrial organization model. Right. Is this something that you see happening through your LinkedIn data, meaning people are no longer part of the old industrial organization?
Absolutely.
And if so, what can LinkedIn and Senator Warner do to make a new social contract?
So this is one of those things, so what we see when we look at the data coming through LinkedIn is more people who are considering what, for lack of a better term, we would call composite kinds of careers, where you put together a bunch of pieces from a bunch of different directions. You can align that over time. In other words, I can take a job and then an internship, and then I can go back to school, and I can do this rapid fire. We've actually seen this change happening a lot. I mean, the average tenure in a job in the United States has been shrinking over the years. But now people are thinking about putting together two pieces simultaneously. It's like I'm going to do this 2 days a week, and I'm going to do this the other 3 days of the week, and on the weekend I'm going to go to school, whatever that combination might be. The technology allows us to be much more flexible in terms of what those opportunities actually are. I believe the future is going to include these composite careers no matter what happens.
But you need things like sick leave, benefits, whatever. Could LinkedIn or something like LinkedIn be the platform, rather than government be the platform, for organizing what would be the social benefits that you normally have from corporations?
So I think the answer is it isn't possible right now, and that's actually the only thing that matters. It isn't possible right now for a company to be that thing all by itself without government. And the reason is that the government is as much about is about making the system works and making sure the system is fully fair to all people who are actually involved. That perspective is something that a company isn't always going to bring to the table. Just being honest about the way companies work. That's how companies work. You concentrate on the places where your business takes you. And sometimes that doesn't take you to full inclusiveness. So whatever the platform, you've got to have a partnership between government and industry in order to be able to solve a problem like this. So whatever that platform is, it's going to have to be both of us working together.
And what are your problems working with government? Is it the poison partisanship, or is it the lack of an innovative, risk-taking mindset?
I think the poison partisanship is problematic because it slows everything down. It makes it impossible to go in certain directions and so forth. Not a well-known problem. I have found that the administration has been deeply committed to innovation. When you look at the Innovation Fellows, when you look at the digital service, healthcare.gov, and what they learned from that entire experience, all that stuff has been fantastically valuable for creating a brand new spirit of speed and urgency within the federal government, which has been wonderful, wonderful to work with. I've got a bunch of friends who have now gone into government, which is not something I ever expected to see happen, because they left Silicon Valley to go do it. And the reason is they saw that the government was going to embrace a lot of what we've learned in the Valley about really making things happen at speed. So I think the government is prepared to be a great partner on many of these things.
Any further thoughts? Open it up there. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I wanted to know what the potential, you had mentioned LinkedIn is being talked about only as white-collar jobs, but how do we bring diversity into all service sectors, and also particularly looking at communities of color, minority communities in general, gender equality? What potential does LinkedIn and other technologies have to bring that not only here in the United States, but also globally?
Real quickly, the question is about diversity, inclusivity, bringing in all people of color around the world and here into these type of things we've been talking about, right?
So the first question you always have to ask is one of accessibility. In other words, do people actually have access to these tools? So in the U.S., there's a deep penetration of these kinds of technologies, but not 100%. So without the full access, you're never going to be able to get to full inclusion. So part of it is how do we actually get to the place where everybody has access to all these tools? And then the second thing is, how do you make sure that people actually know how to use them? Because in a lot of ways, there's a large set of hard to pin down experiences that people can have in their life, which prepares them to participate in these systems. Whether it be, I have a lot of friends who use them, therefore I can observe it actually happening. I have had training in my life which tells me how to do it. I have expectations placed on me that I will be able to take advantage of these things. Whatever that set of things is, that's unevenly distributed. So the question is, can the systems not only be in place and be successful, but also include, like we are when we're doing our work with Skillful, a navigator component. The fact that there's a presence of another human being who will actually be able to provide me the advice and the input I need to be able to use these tools effectively. So we have to have both of those things in place. The problem is similar around the world, which is, but the challenge in terms of access is much, much greater. One thing I would definitely say is that somehow we got to figure out a way in the next few years to make technology education a component of citizenship education. It is not possible for someone to live in a world where their votes, where their money, where the way in which they interact with their government, where the way they interact with other people is entirely mediated by technology, but they don't know how it works. That is not possible. You can't be a good citizen if you don't know what encryption is. You don't have to understand it deeply, but you got to know. So I really applaud the efforts that I've seen around this country to make coding a component of essentially primary education. Because you don't need to be an expert in it, but you got to be able, same way you got to be able to read and write, you got to be able to do it. Because otherwise, you can't interact with the technologies which are going to, and already do to a certain extent, rule the world.
But think more broadly about that question of inclusivity. If I were to push back on you and what you do at LinkedIn, I'd say it's for privileged people who know how to use technology and they're part of networks already. And what if I'm a kid from, inner city Baltimore, and I need a mentor, and I need a summer job, and I need whatever? LinkedIn is the last place they would go. How are you going to solve that?
So regarding LinkedIn being the last place they would go, that I believe is something that we're directly addressing in the work that we're doing in Denver and Phoenix, which is where we're launching the Skillful pilots. As a matter of fact, we're doing this month. So that's the first thing: is you got to be aggressively directing it to get it in people's hands. People got to know it exists, and so forth. But the second thing is, how do you actually get to the place where where an individual who joins LinkedIn, and let's say they even know how to use it, I mean, they're getting help from a navigator or whatever, how do we make sure that that person has access to a network which gives them what they actually need? And the answer is, that economic graph's got to be diverse. You got to get a whole bunch of things, and by diverse I mean diverse people, but I also mean diverse organizations. One of the things which has been amazing about LinkedIn, we have more than 25 million people who on their profiles have said they're interested in doing volunteering, they're interested in causes, they're interested in working with people, they're interested in mentoring. That's an amazing resource to put in people's hands. If I can just do a search and says, just show me people who are interested in mentoring, I want to have breakfast with one of them and find out what's actually going on, you can do that today. So there are people out there who care and want to participate in this, who are already members. The question is, if they're willing to raise their hand, how do we make sure that people are willing to reach out and take that opportunity?
How do you?
The answer is, well, if anybody who wants to have breakfast with me, all they need to do is find me on LinkedIn and send me a message and say, hey.
That's not a valid answer, though, really.
No. Well, you should try it. I'd be happy to have breakfast with you.
I'll have the 10 kids. Look, in New Orleans, in Baltimore, whatever, there are kids who need mentors.
Yeah.
Now, maybe some can email you and go fly and have breakfast with you.
Yes,
Why isn't LinkedIn more involved in helping those who are underserved? I'm sorry to keep pushing back on that.
No.
But I don't think emailing you for breakfast is the right answer.
My point specifically is this. LinkedIn affords not just reaching out to people who are right next to you, in other words, people who you've already met and know, but it also affords you reaching out to people who are nearby you, people who are a friend of a friend, or 1 or even 2 degrees away from you in a network. Those capabilities already exist in the system. Mm-hmm. So when we look at people's networks, and this is a sort of fascinating thing, the diversity of the network grows immensely once you get outside that first ring of people who you're actually connected to. So if you get connected to, if you're basically connected, because you're not going to be connected to people you don't know, for the most part you shouldn't be, I mean, at the very least, when I connect to people on LinkedIn, I only connect to people who I've actually worked with, for the most part, or had a serious business interaction with. That set connects me to an unbelievably diverse collection of people who they know, and an even more diverse set of people who are outside that. You've got power that comes through that network and through that set of introductions already. So you don't have to call somebody cold, like say, hey, Alan, can I come out and have breakfast in California sometime? But rather, through that network, you can reach my estimation that well connected, anybody who lives in New Orleans is no more than 2 or 2.5 leaps away from everybody else in New Orleans.
Way back, yes, and we'll do those two, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Yes, sir. Travis Norm from the Joint Staff over in the Department of Defense. You talk a lot about technology and the social network itself, but as you alluded to, diversity of experiences drive how people view that technology and that information.
Sure.
So what I look for is, as a leader of your organization, how do you build an organization that capitalizes on diversity of thought within the organization so you can develop a better product to reach out to those experiences?
Totally. I'll repeat.
How do you build on the diversity within an organization to be able to reach out so that you can capture the benefits of diversity that might be outside the organization?
So I got 2 quick points on this. So the first one is that diversity of all different kinds is absolutely vital to innovation. There's no way to innovate without a diversity of viewpoints. That doesn't mean there's lots of ways in which people can be diverse around viewpoints. I mean, even down to the idea of like somebody who was trained in something in the arts, sort of working in technology, is a kind of valuable diversity around innovation. But the second thing is, in an organization, you need to be aggressive and you need to lead towards internal diversity. And this is something that certainly we have really concentrated on at LinkedIn. You've got to be the leaders of the organization have to be willing to stand up and say, this matters to us, and we're going to drive to it, because it's a vital thing for our success in terms of interacting with our customers, in terms of building the right products, and in terms of our building a powerful business. In general, the question of diversity and inclusion is a cultural question within a company. It's what your culture looks like. And the only way to make cultural change is through strong leadership.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. My name is Cornelia Weissman from the 7-Eleven Human Performance Wing, and you discussed your economic graph. Is there accessibility to it for, let's say, if I have some research questions that I have, where I have access and transparency needed to go answer those questions?
It's about the access to the economic graph.
Yeah.
Last question.
The short answer is that right now we do access to the economic graph for people who are not part of the LinkedIn organization on a case-by-case basis. Last year we had a program called the Economic Graph Challenge, where we accepted proposals for access to the graph. And we're doing a similar thing this year, where we entertain people coming from the outside and saying, we'd like to make academic use, we'd like to make social use of the graph, including you.
How do I do that?
So the best thing to do is, so I'm looking over here, sitting in the corner are Nicole and Pablo, and they're absolutely the best people to talk to about getting that access.
And so let me end with sort of a broad question. When you look 5 years ahead, where do you see things going, and how can government and private industry partner in getting us to the right place?
So there are a handful of immediate things which I think are going to be tremendously valuable for us and tremendous opportunities. And then there are a handful of interesting challenges. So the first thing is there are about 2.5 billion people on the planet who are not really part of the formal economy. And many of them in the next 5 years are going to become part of it. Mm-hmm. And part of it is, a large part of that's going to be enabled by technology, full stop. That is a major diplomatic opportunity, a major development opportunity, and a major defense opportunity, because that is going to change the complexion of the way the international picture actually looks. That's a huge thing. The second thing is general availability of technology is going to be very substantially increased, where we're going to get to the place where access to technology around the world will begin to approach the levels of access that we have here in the U.S. in that 5-year period. So those are both amazing opportunities because the amount of power and leverage that gives you is absolutely tremendous. This is actually also going to be a 5 years where I think two major things are going to happen. The first one is we're going to have to start moving very aggressively to address the disruptions that technology actually represents among jobs, among particular kinds of professional activity, because we're going to start really feeling it. It already exists today. We already feel the changes in manufacturing, the changes in sort of, if you will, the middle skill job set. We already start feeling those things happening today. Within 5 years, there'll be massive acceleration of those things. All you have to do is read the story about what an amazing thing it was that Google had their first accident in their self-driving car to know how close we are to the presence of autonomous vehicles and what that means for us economically. I mean, wow, in our world. The second is we got to get serious about climate change right away. And the reason is that even though it's a very long burn, that is probably the single most potentially destabilizing factor that exists in the world, and we have to get our arms around it.
Alan Blue, wow, this was fascinating. Good job.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll be right back. That was great. Thanks.